Every battle begins in the mind before it ever reaches our actions. When we lose focus spiritually, distractions slip in quietly, disguising themselves as comfort, pleasure, or relief. But slowly they begin to rob us of peace, clarity, and purpose. That's how the cycle begins. Small moments that pull us away from the voice of God and toward a fog of guilt and confusion. Recognizing the distraction is not about condemnation. It's about awareness. It's about opening your eyes to see how certain patterns can dull your connection to the Spirit. Because what starts as a private weakness can quickly grow into a spiritual weight, heavy enough to silence your prayers and drain your faith. The first step to freedom is not to fight the behavior itself, but to understand why it's there. Most of the time, what we call temptation is actually an escape, a way to numb an unhealed emotion or fill a spiritual emptiness. When we feel disconnected, lonely, or unseen, the mind begins to crave comfort. And if that comfort comes through a habit that feels safe and accessible, it becomes a reflex. The problem is that temporary relief carries long-term consequences, guilt, secrecy, and spiritual fatigue. You start to feel distant from God even though He never left. Awareness brings light. When you recognize that this distraction is feeding off your unaddressed pain, you begin to see it for what it truly is, a counterfeit satisfaction. It gives you the illusion of control while stealing your spiritual strength. That's why you must take a moment to step back, breathe, and ask yourself, what am I really seeking? What need am I trying to satisfy? Because once you name it, you can start replacing it with something that truly nourishes your soul: peace, prayer, purpose, and connection. We often think we're fighting against temptation, but in reality, we're fighting for attention, our attention. The mind that is filled with purpose has no room for destructive thoughts. The heart that is aligned with God's presence doesn't crave quick escapes. It seeks fulfillment through faith and service. Every time you choose awareness over impulse, you reclaim a piece of your spiritual authority. You remind your soul that it was not created to live in cycles of guilt, but in rhythms of grace. Recognizing the distraction doesn't mean shaming yourself for your weakness. It means celebrating your capacity to see clearly again. Because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Once you name the distraction, you strip it of its power. Awareness is light, and light always exposes darkness. The battle begins to shift when you stop hiding from your struggles and start understanding them. That's where real transformation begins. Not in perfection, but in perception. So if you want to win back your peace, start by recognizing the distraction. See it, name it, confront it. Because awareness is the first breath of freedom and the beginning of your spiritual restoration. Renewing the mind is the foundation of lasting change. Once you recognize the distraction and how it pulls you away from spiritual focus, the next step is to realign your thoughts with truth. Every behavior begins as a thought, and every thought either builds or breaks your spiritual strength. The mind is like a garden. Whatever you plant there, whether peace or poison, will eventually grow. If your thoughts are filled with guilt, shame, and fear, those seeds will bear fruit in your emotions and actions. But when you begin to renew your mind through faith, reflection, and truth, you start to reshape your entire inner landscape. Renewing the mind is not about pretending that temptation doesn't exist. It's about changing how you respond to it. Instead of reacting with guilt, you respond with awareness. Instead of saying, I'm weak, you declare, I am growing stronger. The words you speak to yourself carry power. They build internal momentum. If you constantly tell yourself that you can't change, you are programming your mind to remain stuck. But when you begin to meditate on what is true, noble, and pure, you reprogram your consciousness to align with divine strength. That's how faith reshapes thought, through consistent focus on what uplifts instead of what drains. The mind naturally follows the direction of what it repeatedly consumes. That's why renewing, it means filtering what you allow in. Every image you see, every word you hear, every environment you step into influences your inner dialogue. To renew the mind, you must become intentional about your input. Replace noise with stillness, distraction with prayer, negativity with gratitude. Feed your thoughts with truth until lies have no room to grow. You can't pour clean water into a dirty vessel without washing it first. Renewal is that cleansing process. It's removing what no longer serves your spirit and making space for what brings life. As you renew your mind, you'll notice a shift. Temptation starts to lose its grip, not because it disappears, but because it no longer finds agreement in your thoughts. When your inner conversation changes, your behavior follows. You stop identifying yourself by your failures and start seeing yourself as someone chosen for victory. This shift creates a ripple effect throughout your spiritual life. Your prayers grow deeper, your confidence strengthens, and your decisions begin to reflect your higher purpose. Renewing the mind requires patience. You won't rewrite years of patterns in a single day, but every moment you choose awareness over autopilot, truth over lies, you reclaim spiritual territory. Eventually, the old thoughts fade and peace takes their place. You start to experience freedom, not as a sudden miracle, but as a gradual awakening. The mind that once echoed guilt now resounds with grace. The heart that once battled shame now beats with purpose. Transformation doesn't begin in your hands, it begins in your head. And when your thoughts align with truth, your spirit rises into its rightful power. Strengthening spiritual discipline is the bridge between knowing the truth and living it. Awareness and renewal are powerful beginnings, but without discipline, even the most sincere intentions fade into forgetfulness. Discipline is the structure that protects your growth. It's the daily decision to stay aligned with what truly matters. When you commit to spiritual practices, prayer, meditation, fasting, journaling, you are building a framework strong enough to carry your transformation. These aren't empty rituals. They are reminders to the soul that you belong to something higher than your impulses. Discipline is not about punishment or control. It's about freedom. Real freedom isn't doing whatever you feel. It's being able to say no to what weakens you. It's the strength to choose purpose over pleasure, consistency over chaos. When you practice discipline, you are training your spirit to lead your body, not the other way around. You become less reactive, more focused, more peaceful. Every time you resist distraction and choose spiritual practice, you reinforce a pattern of victory. You teach your mind that it is no longer the servant of impulse, but the steward of purpose. Daily habits are like spiritual armor. When you begin your morning in prayer, you are setting the tone for the day, declaring that your first conversation belongs to God, not the noise of the world. When you spend time in silence or reflection, you are cleansing the clutter that tries to overwhelm your thoughts. When you fast or practice restraint, you remind your body that it doesn't rule your spirit. These small, consistent acts build an inner strength that cannot be shaken by temptation. They don't make you perfect, they make you prepared. Discipline also strengthens faith through repetition. Every time you pray, even when you don't feel like it, you prove to yourself that faith is not based on emotion, but on decision. Every time you meditate instead of scrolling, you reclaim attention from distraction. Every time you read something that uplifts instead of drains, you plant seeds of clarity and wisdom. The more you practice these things, the more natural they become. Spiritual discipline is not about forcing holiness, it's about forming it through daily obedience. There will be days when you stumble, moments when discipline feels impossible. But that's when grace does its greatest work. The goal is not to be flawless, the goal is to be faithful. A disciplined life doesn't happen overnight. It's built moment by moment, choice by choice. Each time you return to your practice after falling, you prove that your faith is stronger than your failure. Over time, this consistency becomes your identity. And when your life becomes disciplined, your spirit begins to glow with stability and peace. You find that the same distractions that once dominated your thoughts now barely whisper. Your energy shifts from resistance to flow. You no longer fight for focus, it naturally follows you. Because true discipline doesn't imprison your soul, it liberates it. Guarding your environment is one of the most overlooked yet essential parts of spiritual growth. No matter how strong your will or how sincere your faith, if you constantly surround yourself with influences that weaken your focus, your spirit will eventually tire. Environment shapes energy. What you watch, who you spend time with, what you listen to, and even the spaces where you rest, all of it feeds your spirit or drains it. The truth is, you can't grow in peace while living in noise, and you can't walk in purity while constantly feeding your mind with impurity. Guarding your environment is not about isolation, it's about alignment. It's about creating a space where your purpose can breathe freely without being suffocated by distraction. Many people underestimate how subtly environments influence them. A single conversation, a careless video, a negative person, these can shift your entire mood and open the door to old habits. The spirit thrives in clarity, but distraction thrives in chaos. If you're constantly surrounded by temptation, it's not a question of if you'll fall, but when. That's why setting boundaries is not weakness, it's wisdom. When you decide what enters your space, your mind, your home, your relationships, you are declaring authority over your life. You're saying, I will not let what destroys others destroy me. Guarding your environment doesn't mean you live in fear of the world. It means you live aware of it. You begin to notice what energizes your soul and what drains it. You pay attention to the subtle shifts in your spirit when you engage with certain people or platforms. Some environments feed peace, others feed confusion. Some draw you closer to truth, others keep you numb and distracted. Once you start discerning the difference, you gain control over what shapes you. You can't always control what happens around you, but you can always control what you allow to stay. Sometimes, guarding your environment means making uncomfortable decisions, walking away from relationships that no longer align with your growth, limiting media that fuels unhealthy thoughts, or restructuring your daily routine so that peace has priority. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Every act of protection over your space is an act of honor toward your purpose. The more intentional you become about your surroundings, the more your spirit will flourish. You'll begin to notice that temptation loses its power when it can't find a home in your environment. Creating a sacred environment means filling your space with what inspires you, music that uplifts, words that encourage, friends who challenge you to grow. It's about atmosphere. The right atmosphere nurtures your faith, strengthens your discipline, and gives you the clarity to stay aligned with truth. When your environment reflects your intentions, it becomes easier to live in harmony with them. And as your surroundings become cleaner, quieter, and more purposeful, your inner world mirrors that peace. You stop fighting to stay grounded because everything around you supports your balance. That's when spiritual protection becomes effortless, because you've built an environment where temptation cannot thrive. Accountability and community are two of the most powerful tools for sustaining spiritual growth. No one was ever meant to walk this journey alone. The struggle to overcome temptation and stay spiritually grounded can feel isolating, but healing rarely happens in isolation. It happens in connection. When you open your life to trusted people who share your values and understand your faith, you create an environment of support, not judgment. Accountability isn't about exposing your weaknesses, it's about protecting your progress. It's about saying, I don't want to fight this battle alone anymore. We live in a world that celebrates independence, but often forgets that spiritual strength thrives in interdependence. The very design of community is divine. Iron sharpens iron, and hearts are strengthened when they beat together in purpose. When you share your journey with others, especially those who have walked similar paths, you gain wisdom, encouragement, and perspective. Their testimonies remind you that transformation is possible, and their presence reminds you that you are not beyond grace. Sometimes, just knowing someone is praying for you can reignite your own faith when it feels weak. Accountability breaks the secrecy that keeps many people trapped in cycles of guilt. When you live in silence, shame grows stronger. But when you bring your struggles into the light with safe, trustworthy people, that shame loses its hold. You begin to realize that you're not defined by your mistakes. You're refined by your willingness to heal. A friend, mentor, or faith leader who listens without condemnation can help you see what you cannot see alone. They can speak truth when your thoughts are clouded and remind you of your identity when you forget it. True community doesn't just help you when you fall, it helps prevent the fall. When you're surrounded by people who encourage prayer, discipline, and growth, your environment naturally supports your spiritual goals. They hold you accountable to your own values. They remind you of your commitments when distractions whisper otherwise. In moments of weakness, they lift you up. In moments of strength, they celebrate you. This rhythm of giving and receiving support creates a powerful foundation for lasting change. But accountability only works when it's built on honesty. You can't heal what you hide. Being open with someone you trust requires humility, and humility invites grace. It's not about confessing for the sake of guilt. It's about sharing for the sake of growth. The moment you open your heart, God opens a pathway for freedom. And when you see others walking the same road, it becomes easier to believe that you too can overcome. Over time, accountability transforms from a lifeline into a lifestyle. You learn to value relationships that challenge you as much as those that comfort you. You stop fearing correction because you understand it's rooted in love. And as community strengthens you, you become strong enough to strengthen others. That's how faith multiplies, not in isolation, but in connection. Walking in grace and growth is the stage where everything you've learned begins to merge into a lifestyle, awareness, renewal, discipline, boundaries, and accountability all build toward this moment, the moment you stop trying to earn freedom and begin to live in it. Grace is not a reward for perfection. It's the atmosphere that makes transformation possible. Growth is the evidence that grace is working in your life. When you walk in grace, you no longer define yourself by past failures or weaknesses. You understand that change is not an event, it's a journey. Every day becomes an opportunity to rise a little higher, to think a little clearer, to live a little freer. There is something powerful about realizing that grace doesn't excuse your mistakes. It redeems them. It takes what once broke you and turns it into wisdom. You no longer run from your past, you learn from it. That's growth, and that's what walking in grace truly means. Refusing to stay bound by shame and choosing to move forward with humility and gratitude. The more you embrace this mindset, the lighter your spirit becomes. You start to see setbacks as lessons, not punishments. You begin to understand that even the hardest moments have been shaping your character, building your endurance, preparing you for purpose. Growth doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually like the dawn. At first, the light feels faint, but with each step of faith, it grows brighter. The person you were yesterday begins to fade, and the person you're becoming starts to emerge. Grace gives you the courage to take those steps even when you stumble. It reminds you that progress is still progress, no matter how slow. When you walk in grace, you stop living from fear of failure and start living from faith in transformation. You begin to notice small victories, peace where there used to be anxiety, clarity where there used to be confusion, self-control where there used to be impulse. Those moments may seem small, but they are the signs of a spirit being renewed. To walk in grace also means extending that same grace to others. Once you experience freedom, you naturally want to help others find it. You stop judging and start understanding. You see people not by their struggles, but by their potential. This perspective keeps your heart soft, your mind humble, and your spirit open to growth. Grace teaches you compassion because it reminds you of what you've overcome. It makes you a vessel of hope for someone still fighting their way out. And so walking in grace and growth becomes a rhythm, a spiritual heartbeat that keeps you balanced and aware. You keep moving forward, not because you have to, but because you want to. You grow not for perfection, but for purpose. You live each day knowing that you are a work in progress, perfectly loved, continually refined. And as grace carries you forward, you realize freedom was never the destination. It was the journey all along.